She walked into the base commissary wearing an old faded military jacket, sleeves frayed patches worn thin. A few young officers laughed behind her back, whispering that it looked like something pulled from a thrift bin. She didn't respond. She just kept browsing the shelves quietly, selecting items while ignoring their jokes. What they didn't know was that her silence carried the weight of classified missions. No one was allowed to remember. Sunlight spilling across the grounds in orderly formation. The base came alive with the sound of boots on asphalt vehicles, humming to life, and distant cadence calls from morning PT American flags snapped in the breeze, rising up flagpoles across the installation. As another day began, Miranda Reeves moved through this carefully choreographed routine like a ghost, both part of and separate from the military world around her. At 55, she carried herself with the straight-backed posture that had been drilled into her decades ago, though her right leg dragged slightly with each step, a private reminder of costs paid long ago. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her expression neutral as she approached the base commissary. The sliding doors parted with a mechanical sigh. Miranda adjusted the collar of her faded olive-green military jacket, a relic from another lifetime. The sleeves were frayed at the cuffs, the fabric worn thin at the elbows, and the color had long since faded from olive to something closer to khaki. In places she wore it not out of necessity, but from habit and private remembrance. The morning air had carried a chill, and the jacket was the first thing she had reached for inside. The commissary bustled with the morning crowd. Young families pushed carts down aisles, retired veterans congregated by the coffee station, and uniformed personnel grabbed breakfast sandwiches and energy drinks on their way to duty. Miranda picked up a red shopping basket and moved deliberately through the store. Consulting a neatly folded list from her pocket, she paused in the canned goods section, comparing prices with careful attention. Her fingers, marked by a surgical scar across the right wrist, traced over the labels of soup cans. Calculating the best value money was tighter these days. The VA benefits that should have sustained her had become entangled in bureaucratic questions about service records that officially did not exist. Two young lieutenants in pressed uniforms rounded the corner into her aisle, their conversation cutting through her concentration. "Did you see the new equipment allocation for field training?" asked the taller one, his lieutenant bars gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Not yet, but Miller says it's the same shortage as last quarter," his companion replied. Then stopped short as he noticed Miranda. His eyes flicked to her jacket and the corner of his mouth twitched. "Speaking of shortages," he murmured just loud enough to be heard. Miranda continued examining soup cans, her expression unchanged, though her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "Must have raided her grandfather's closet," the taller lieutenant said with a smirk. "That thing looks like it survived World War II more like Vietnam," the other replied. "Probably found it at the thrift store on discount day." Miranda selected 2 cans of soup and placed them in her basket, then moved down the aisle toward the pasta section. The lieutenants followed their morning errands, apparently forgotten in favor of this new entertainment, as she reached for a box of spaghetti on a high shelf. Her jacket sleeve rode up, revealing more of the surgical scar on her wrist. The movement also caused her to wash slightly, her right shoulder protesting. The stretch the physical therapist had warned her that full range of motion might never return. But Miranda had learned to work around limitations long ago. "Think that's from actual service," the shorter lieutenant whispered, not quite quietly enough, or just trying to look the part. "Hard to tell these days. Remember that guy last month claiming special forces when he couldn't even name the selection process?" Miranda's hand closed around the pasta box, her knuckles whitening briefly before she placed it in her basket. She reached into her inner jacket pocket for her grocery list, and as she did, a faded photograph slipped partially into view before being tucked away again. Only Miranda knew it showed 5 soldiers in desert camo faces, partially obscured by shadows, and tactical gear standing beside a helicopter with markings that had been deliberately obscured before the photo was developed. She continued through the commissary, adding items to her basket, while the lieutenants maintained their casual pursuit. their comments growing incrementally bolder as they noted her continued silence. When she stopped at the dairy case, a small group of enlisted personnel entered, laughing among themselves. One of the specialists recognized the lieutenants and offered a quick salute. "Morning, Sears." "At ease," the taller lieutenant said with a wave. "Early shopping run." "Yes, sir, brigade coffee mess needed restocking." The lieutenant nodded toward Miranda. "What do you think of that vintage fashion statement?" The specialist glanced at Miranda's jacket, taking in the faded fabric and worn edges. He grinned clearly, sensing the direction his superior wanted. The conversation to go, very retro, sir, almost authentic looking, almost being the key word, the lieutenant said loud enough now that several other shoppers glanced their way. Miranda closed the dairy case door, a carton of eggs now in her basket. She turned toward the checkout lanes, limping slightly as she changed direction. Long hours standing always aggravated the old injury, though she'd learned to disguise the weakness when necessary. Classic stolen valor prep. The shorter lieutenant said, no longer bothering to lower his voice, "Bet she's heading to the VA, next to try for benefits." Miranda's destination was indeed the VA office on the other side of the base, though not for the reasons they assumed. The quarterly appeal of her case was scheduled for 11. Unquack another attempt to have her service records partially unsealed so her medical claims could be processed. 3 previous attempts had ended with apologetic rejections from administrators who could not acknowledge operations that officially never happened as she approached the checkout. The cashier, a retired master sergeant, judging by the veteran's cap he wore, noticed her jacket. His eyes lingered for a moment on the faded area above the left breast pocket, where a unit patch had once been clearly visible. Now only the ghost of stitching remained, the embroidery worn away by years until only those who knew exactly what to look for might recognize it. The cashier said nothing, though simply scanning her items with practiced efficiency. Miranda paid in cash, counting out bills carefully from a thin wallet. "Have a good day, ma'am," the cashier said as he handed her the receipt. "You too," Miranda replied, her voice slightly husky from disuse. They were the first words she had spoken aloud all morning with her purchases. Bagged, Miranda headed toward customer service. The quarterly VA appeal required her to verify her address on base, a formality that never seemed to make it permanently into their system. Behind her, she could hear the lieutenants had finished their own shopping and were now in line a few registers away. The customer service line moved slowly. Miranda stood patiently. Weight shifted to her left leg to ease the pressure on her right. Her mind drifted as she waited, carried back 22 years to another desert morning, the air filled with grit and the smell of aviation fuel. Captain Reeves' extraction window is closing. The voice of her team leader came to her across the decades. "We either go now or we don't go at all." The memory dissolved as the customer service representative called next. Miranda stepped forward to the counter where a young woman with a name tag reading Alicia smiled professionally. "How can I help you today?" Alicia asked. "I need to verify my current address for base records," Miranda said, sliding her ID toward the clerk. "Of course," Alicia said, typing the information into her computer. "Are you active duty or a dependent?" "Veteran," Miranda answered. "I'll need to see your veteran ID card or DD-214, please." Miranda knew this would happen just as it happened every 3 months. "My service records are under special classification. I have a letter from the Department of Defense Records Office." She produced a folder containing several official-looking documents. Alicia looked uncertain, clearly not trained for this exception. "I'm sorry, but we need standard documentation. Let me call my supervisor." Behind her, Miranda could hear the lieutenants had finished checking out and were now standing nearby, watching the exchange with obvious interest. "Some people will claim anything for a 10% discount," the taller one said, just loud enough to carry to those nearby. Several people chuckled, including one of the customer service representatives. At the next counter, over the supervisor, arrived a middle-aged woman with an efficient manner. She examined Miranda's paperwork with a frown. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but these documents don't meet our requirements for veteran status verification. We need standard documentation." "These are the only documents I'm authorized to carry, Miranda," explained, her voice remaining, even despite the familiar frustration building behind her calm facade. "Then I can't update your information in our system," the supervisor said apologetically. "You'll need to contact the VA directly. That's why I'm here." Miranda said the VA sent me to verify my address with base records before my appointment. The bureaucratic circle was one she had walked many times before her service with Spectre Group remained classified at a level that prevented normal documentation. Yet the injuries she had sustained required ongoing medical care. Each denial added another layer of frustration to a process that seemed designed to make her give up behind her. The lieutenants had drawn a small crowd with their commentary classic case. The shorter one was saying to an interested specialist, "Wear something that looks military enough to pass a quick glance. Make up some story about classified operations. So no one can verify anything. People who do that should be prosecuted." The specialist agreed, casting a judgmental glance toward Miranda. The supervisor handed back Miranda's folder. "I'm sorry I can't help you. You might try the main administration building instead." Miranda accepted the folder, tucking it into her jacket's inner pocket as she did the edge of a challenge coin. Briefly became visible not the mass-produced variety sold in base gift shops, but a rare specialized design given only to members of units whose existence remained classified. "Thank you for your time," Miranda said quietly. She collected her groceries and turned to leave, finding herself facing the small crowd that had gathered. The expressions ranged from outright mockery from the lieutenants to uncomfortable embarrassment from those who sensed they might be witnessing something they didn't fully understand. Miranda straightened her shoulders, the ingrained military bearing asserting itself. Automatically, she walked toward the exit, maintaining her dignity. Despite the whispers that followed her, the automatic doors slid open ahead, revealing the bright morning sunlight. Beyond the automatic doors slid open, and Miranda found herself face to face with another uniform, this one adorned with 4 stars. General Marcus Harris entered the commissary, flanked by 2 aides. His attention focused on a document in his hands. He was a tall man with close cropped silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent a lifetime in command. "I want those deployment numbers recalculated by this afternoon," he was saying to the aide on his right. "The committee needs accurate projections, not best-case scenarios." "Yes, sir," the aide replied. Making a note on his tablet, Miranda automatically shifted to the side to let them pass, tucking her grocery bags closer to her body, her eyes downcast in the instinctive difference civilians often adopt around high-ranking officers. She had nearly cleared their path when General Harris glanced up from his document, his eyes passing over her in the casual assessment of a security-conscious officer. Then he stopped. His body went rigid, the document in his hand, forgotten as his gaze locked onto the nearly invisible patch above Miranda's heart. It was nothing more than a shadow on the fabric. Now the embroidery worn away until only the faintest outline remained, a ghost of stitches that had once formed a symbol known to very few. The general's aides continued 2 steps before realizing their commanding officer had stopped. They turned, confused expressions giving way to concern as they observed the general's reaction. The commissary's ambient noise seemed to dim as General Harris handed his document to the nearest aide, without taking his eyes off Miranda, then with precision that came from decades of service. He snapped to attention and rendered a perfect formal salute. Miranda froze, her grocery bag suddenly heavy in her hands. The salute in civilian settings was against protocol. The recognition it represented was unprecedented. The moment stretched the general's salute, unwavering around them. Conversations died as military personnel noticed the extraordinary scene unfolding. The lieutenants who had been mocking Miranda moments earlier fell silent, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion with practiced muscle memory that transcended the years. Miranda carefully transferred her grocery bags to her left hand and returned the salute with perfect military precision, her movements transforming from the cautious motions of a civilian to the crisp certainty of a soldier captain. Reeves General Harris said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet specter, Group Thrawn 03. It was both a statement and a question, an acknowledgement and a verification. 22 years collapsed between them, compressing time until that night in the Iranian desert felt as immediate as yesterday. Yes, sir, Miranda confirmed, her voice stronger. Now the general lowered his salute, and Miranda followed suit. The commissary had gone completely still, all attention focused on the unexpected exchange between a 4-star general and a woman in a worn military jacket. At ease, Captain, the general said, though Miranda held no official rank anymore. Thank you, sir, she replied, decades of military discipline guiding her response. General Harris dismissed his aides with a short gesture. Wait for me outside. His tone made it clear this was not a request to be questioned. The aides exchanged glances, but promptly headed for the exit, leaving the general alone with Miranda, in the midst of the growing crowd of onlookers. It was your unit that got us out, the general said, his voice quieter now, but still clear enough for those nearby to hear. 3 helicopters down hostiles on all sides. Your team created the extraction corridor that saved 32 of us, including myself. Miranda nodded once the memories she usually kept carefully contained now surging to the surface, the night operation, the sandstorm that had grounded 3 extraction helicopters, the diplomatic team and their military escorts, trapped as Iranian Revolutionary Guard units, closed in the impossible choices made by her 6-person team to create an escape route. That insignia the general continued gesturing to the faded area on her jacket. Hasn't been authorized for wear since the unit was disbanded. Official records list. The extraction as equipment. Malfunction recovery. Successful. The crowd began to understand they were witnessing something extraordinary. A classified operation being acknowledged in public. For perhaps the first time, the lieutenants who had been mocking Miranda stood frozen, their faces draining of color as the implications of their earlier behavior became clear. How many of you made it home from that operation, Captain? The general asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. 3 of us, sir, Miranda said softly. I'm the last one now. General Harris absorbed this information with a slight tightening around his eyes, the only visible sign of emotion. Would you join me for coffee, Captain? He gestured toward the small cafe area in the corner of the commissary. Of course, sir, Miranda replied as they moved toward the cafe. The crowd parted silently, respect and curiosity mingling in the wake of the revelation. The lieutenant stood rooted to the spot, mortification evident in their rigid postures. The general and Miranda settled at a small table in the corner, away from most of the onlookers. A young airman working at the cafe counter rushed over to take their order, clearly flustered by the general's presence. Just coffee black, the general said the same, Miranda added. When the airman retreated, General Harris leaned forward. I've often wondered what happened to your team after the debriefing. Everything went into classified files, so deep even I couldn't access them anymore. That was by design. Sir, Miranda said Spectre Group operated under triple-blind protocols, mission parameters, team composition, even our existence was compartmentalized for good reason. The general acknowledged that operation prevented a diplomatic catastrophe that could have led to open war. The airmen returned with their coffees, setting them down with nervous care before retreating. The general waited until they were alone again before continuing. What brings you to Fort Braxton? Captain, last intelligence placed you retired in Colorado Medical Appeal, sir. Miranda answered her professional demeanor, hiding the frustration of countless rejected claims. I've been trying to get the VA to recognize injuries sustained during operations without being able to reference the operations themselves. The general concluded understanding. Immediately catch 22 of the highest order, yes, sir. My right leg and shoulder were damaged during the Tyrant extraction. The medical records exist, but they're classified at a level the VA administrators can't access. General Harris's expression, hardened, that ends today, He pulled out his phone and dialed with quick, decisive movements. "This is General Harris. I need immediate action on a personnel matter." He paused, listening. "Yes, that level of clearance. My authorization code is Sierra 9, Delta 40 Tango." Another pause as he listened to the response. "I need everything we have on Spectre Group declassified, immediately, specifically relating to personnel injuries sustained during the TAN operation, 2003 Priority Directive." He listened once more. "Yes, I understand the protocols override them. This is a direct order." He ended the call and returned the phone to his pocket, his gaze meeting. Miranda's bureaucracy moves slowly, especially when it comes to declassification, but my office will expedite everything they can. Your service will not continue to go unrecognized. "Captain, thank you, sir," Miranda said, her composure maintained. Despite the surge of emotion, his words triggered after years of fighting the system alone, the simple act of recognition felt almost overwhelming. Their conversation was interrupted as the two lieutenants approached the table, their earlier confidence replaced by evident discomfort. They stopped at a respectful distance, coming to attention before the general. "Sir, request permission to speak." The taller lieutenant said, his voice tightly. Controlled General Harris glanced at Miranda, a silent question in his eyes. She gave a small nod. "Granted," the general said. The lieutenant turned to Miranda. "Ma'am, I wish to apologize for my extremely inappropriate and disrespectful behavior. There is no excuse for how we spoke to you or about you." His companion joined in. "We acted shamefully, ma'am. We failed to uphold the values of the officer corps and the respect owed to all service members, especially those who served in classified operations." Miranda studied them for a moment, seeing beyond their current embarrassment to the officers. "They might become, you couldn't have known," she said finally. "That was the point of units like mine. We operated in shadows, so others could work in the light." "That doesn't excuse our behavior," the taller lieutenant said. "We judged based on appearances, not understanding what we were seeing." "A lesson worth learning early in your careers," General Harris observed, his tone making it clear that while the apology was accepted, the incident would not be forgotten. "Yes, sir," both lieutenants replied in unison. "Return to your duties." The general dismissed them. A lieutenant's departed word of what had transpired had clearly spread through the commissary. Veterans began approaching the table, not interrupting, but offering quiet nods of respect or simple acknowledgments as they passed. The atmosphere had transformed from one of mockery to profound respect. "Your jacket," General Harris said, returning to their conversation. "It's not standard issue for Spectre Group. I remember your team wore modified multicam patterns." Miranda ran her fingers over the worn fabric, a gesture filled with memory. "It belonged to Major Callahan, our unit commander. He didn't make it back from Tyrann. I've kept it all these years." The general nodded, understanding the weight of carrying a fallen comrade's memory. "Daniel Callahan was one of the finest officers I ever encountered. I was never officially briefed on how he died covering our extraction, sir. He held the perimeter alone, so the rest of us could get the diplomatic team to the secondary extraction point. His last order was for us not to come back for him. And you've carried his jacket ever since," the general observed. "It was all that made it back. Besides his dog tags, Miranda confirmed those went to his family with the official story about a training accident. The jacket came to me since I was his exo general." Harris studied her with newfound understanding. "And the patch, I'm surprised you keep it visible at all, given the classification level." "Time did that for me," Sir Miranda said with the ghost of a smile. "It's worn away enough that only someone who knew exactly what to look for would recognize it. I've kept the original patch in storage all these years." Along with the memories, the general added, "Some things you don't need physical reminders to remember." Sir, around them the commissary had returned to its normal operations. Though glances continued to be cast their way, the supervisor from customer service approached cautiously, her earlier bureaucratic certainty replaced by nervous deference. General Harris, she began, I want to apologize for any inconvenience earlier. If there's anything customer service can do to assist Captain Reeves, we would be honored to help, thank you. The general replied, I believe we'll be resolving Captain Reeves's documentation issues at a higher level today, of course, sir. The supervisor said. Retreating quickly, Miranda watched the interaction with quiet amusement. Amazing how quickly things change. When a general takes interest, rank has its privileges. General Harris acknowledged, though, in this case it's simply correcting a long-standing oversight. He checked his watch. I have a meeting in 20 minutes I can't postpone, but I want you to come to my office afterward. We have much to discuss about ensuring you receive the benefits and recognition you're entitled to. That's not necessary, Sir. Miranda began it. Absolutely, is the general countered firmly. What your team did saved lives, including mine. The classification was necessary, but allowing that same classification to deny you proper medical care and benefits is unacceptable. Some forms of gratitude shouldn't remain classified. 3 months later, Miranda Reeves walked through the same automatic doors of the Fort Braxton commissary. The morning routine around her remained unchanged. Recruits jogging in formation flags, rising on poles across the base personnel, hurrying to their duty stations. But for Miranda, everything was different. She still wore the same faded olive green jacket, but it had been carefully cleaned and preserved. The patch above her heart, once worn to near invisibility, had been restored. The emblem of Spectre Group, now clearly visible though subdued below, it gleamed a small pin representing the presidential. Silence. Miranda's stride was stronger now, her limp less pronounced. The medical treatments she had been fighting to receive for years had finally begun courtesy of expedited VA approvals that appeared mysteriously in the system 2 days after her meeting with General Harris. Physical therapy was slowly restoring function to her damaged leg and shoulder, though the therapist warned that some limitations would always remain. The commissary was busy with the morning rush, but today, Miranda noticed the difference in how people regarded her. The mocking glances were gone, replaced by nods of recognition or respect. Not everyone knew her story, most of the details remained classified, but word had spread through the base community that the woman in the faded jacket was someone who had earned her place in military history, even if that history remained partially redacted. The clerk at the customer service counter recognized her immediately. "Good morning, Captain Reeves," she called with a respectful nod. "Good morning, Alicia," Miranda replied, having learned the young woman's name during her now much smoother interactions with base services. As Miranda selected a shopping basket and began moving through the aisles, she noticed one of the lieutenants from that day 3 months ago. He was alone this time, examining canned goods with the serious concentration of someone still learning to manage a household budget on military pay when he looked up and saw Miranda. His expression cycled quickly through recognition, embarrassment, and resolve. He approached her with the direct manner officers were taught to use when addressing difficult situations. "Captain Reeves," he said, coming to a respectful stop several feet away, "Lieutenant Harmon, I wanted to tell you that your case study is now part of our professional development curriculum." Miranda regarded him with mild surprise. "Is that so?" "Yes." "Ma'am, General Harris personally introduced it to the officer training program. They don't share all the classified details." "Of course, but they use your story to teach us about making assumptions and respecting those who served before us, especially in ways that aren't obvious from insignia or uniform." Miranda nodded, accepting this information with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything good lessons for any officer they are. "Ma'am," the lieutenant hesitated, then added, "I've taken those lessons particularly to heart, given my personal failure." "In that area, we all learn from experience, Lieutenant," Miranda said, her tone softening slightly. "Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from our mistakes." "Yes, ma'am." He straightened his shoulders. "Thank you for your service, Captain, both then and now." As the lieutenant moved away, Miranda continued her shopping with a thoughtful expression. The exchange had been one of many such encounters over the past months. As word of her service had spread through official and unofficial channels, General Harris had been true to his word, starting the process of limited declassification for the Spectre Group records related to medical treatment and benefits. While most operational details remained highly classified, enough had been made available to validate the service of the surviving team members. For Miranda, the changes went beyond improved medical care and proper benefits. After years of operating in shadows and then living in the limbo of unacknowledged service, the simple act of recognition had shifted something fundamental in her relationship with her past. She completed her shopping efficiently, selecting items with the same careful attention to value. Though financial concerns were less pressing now that her disability benefits had been approved, as she approached the checkout, she noticed the same cashier who had recognized her jacket that first day morning. "Captain," he said with a nod to her patch. "Good to see that getting the respect it deserves now." "Morning, Master Sergeant," she replied, having learned his name and former rank during previous visits. "Things have improved considerably." "About time," he said as he scanned her items. "Some of us suspected what that fade-out patch might be, but you don't ask about those things unless someone wants to tell you." "Appreciate the discretion," Miranda said. "It's been ingrained for so long. It's still strange having it acknowledged, I imagine." So he finished bagging her groceries. "My nephew's at the academy. Now says they've started teaching about specialized units in proper protocol." "Your unit specifically got mentioned, though. Not by name or mission? Details." "Progress," Miranda agreed, paying for her groceries. As she turned from the checkout, a young female officer approached her, moving with the slightly nervous energy of someone about to speak to a superior they greatly respect. She was perhaps 25, with lieutenant bars gleaming on her uniform and the focused intensity of the recently commissioned. "Excuse me," the young woman said. "Are you Captain Miranda Reeves from Spectre Group?" Miranda assessed. The lieutenant, with a quick glance, noting the intelligence insignia on her uniform, "I am." The lieutenant came to attention, offering a crisp salute. "Lieutenant Sarah Mercer." "Ma'am, 103rd Military Intelligence Battalion." Miranda returned the salute with ingrained precision at ease. "Lieutenant, how can I help you, ma'am? I've been studying your extraction techniques. As part of advanced training, they've incorporated the declassified portions of your Thyron operation into the updated field manual." The lieutenant's expression showed genuine admiration. "Your innovations in limited resource extraction under hostile conditions have become foundational training for the first time in longer than she could remember." Miranda felt a flush of pride that had nothing to do with hidden accomplishments. "I'm glad the lessons we learned the hard way are being passed along." "They are," Ma'am Lieutenant Mercer assured her. "In fact, I'm part of a training development team working on updated protocols based on your team's methods." She hesitated briefly. "I was wondering if you might consider speaking to my platoon. Sometime having insight directly from you would be invaluable." 20 years of instinctive silence warred briefly with the new reality of selective disclosure. Miranda studied the young officer, seeing in her the same determination and intelligence that had marked the members of her own team. "So long ago, I'd be happy to speak with your platoon," Miranda said, surprising herself with how easily the words came, within classification limitations. Of course, Lieutenant Mercer's face lit up. "That would be incredible, ma'am. The team would benefit tremendously from your experience." They exchanged contact information, and as the lieutenant departed with a final salute, Miranda found herself contemplating this unexpected turn in her life's path. After decades of shadows, she was stepping cautiously into the light, finding purpose in sharing what could be shared with the next generation. As Miranda left the commissary, grocery bags in hand, she passed a group of young soldiers who straightened instinctively at the sight of her patch and citation. Their reactions were no longer based on assumptions about a worn jacket, but on recognition of what it represented. Outside, the morning sun had risen fully, casting sharp relief across the orderly landscape of Fort Braxton. Miranda paused for a moment, adjusting to the brightness. A figure approached from the direction of headquarters, and she recognized General Harris walking with another officer. The general noticed her and altered his course slightly to intercept her path. "Captain Reeves," he greeted her, "just the person I wanted to see." General Miranda acknowledged with a nod. "How can I help you, sir? I've been reviewing the progress on the declassification process. He said there's been a development I think you'll want to hear about." "Sir, we've located Specialist Rodriguez's family," the general said, referring to another member of Spectre Group who hadn't survived with the partial declassification. "We can finally arrange proper recognition for his sacrifice. His daughter will receive his Silver Star next month." Miranda absorbed this news, thinking of the young communications specialist who had died, ensuring their extraction team maintained contact during the operation. His daughter must be in her 20s now. 26, the general confirmed. She grew up believing her father died in a training accident. Now she'll know he died a hero. Even if she can't know all the details, that matters. Miranda said softly, "It matters a great deal. We'd like you to be part of the ceremony." General Harris continued, "As the last surviving team member, your presence would mean a lot to his family." "Of course, sir, I'd be honored." The general nodded. "Excellent. My aide will send you the details." He gestured to the patch on her jacket. "I see you've restored the insignia." "Yes, sir, seemed appropriate now that it's partially acknowledged." "It suits you, Captain," the general said. "Always did." He checked his watch. "I need to get to a briefing, but there's something else I wanted to mention. We're establishing a specialized training program for extraction operations under complex conditions. Your input would be invaluable in designing the curriculum." "Teaching was never my specialty, sir," Miranda said cautiously. "Experience is what we need, Captain, the kind that can't be found in manuals. Think about it." With a final nod, the general continued toward headquarters, leaving Miranda to consider this new possibility as she walked toward her car. Miranda's thoughts drifted to the members of her team who hadn't lived to see this day: Major Callahan, whose jacket she wore; Specialist Rodriguez, whose family would finally learn part of the truth; Lieutenant Way; and Sergeant Decker, who had made it home but succumbed to injuries and illness in the years since she had carried their memories alone for so long. The sole custodian of their shared history, now at least some of that history would be preserved, acknowledged, and learned from. Not everything, some aspects of their operations would remain classified for decades to come, but enough that their service and sacrifices would no longer be completely hidden in redacted files in officially non-existent units. Miranda reached her car and carefully placed her groceries in the trunk. As she closed it, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. The woman who looked back at her stood straighter than she had in years, the restored patch and new citation gleaming in the morning sun. For the first time in decades, Miranda Reeves smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. She was no longer invisible, no longer caught between worlds. The classified operations would always be part of her, but they no longer defined the entirety of her existence. She had stepped out of the shadows, not completely into the light. Some shadows would always remain, but into a middle ground where her service could be acknowledged, where the next generation could learn from what she and her team had accomplished and sacrificed. As Miranda drove away from the commissary, she began mentally preparing for her meeting with Lieutenant Mercer's platoon. There were lessons to be shared, wisdom to be passed along, a legacy to be honored after 20 years of silence. She finally had something she could say out loud.